Welcome to the Stepmom Side with Alicia Crasco, the podcast for stepmoms ready to create the life they want and one they actually have a say in. Here we talk all things stepmom life and just a little bit more. Leave the superficial conversations at the door and get ready for perspective shifts and actionable advice to help you on your way to creating the life you want, one step at a time. Hi, Abby. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Now that we're recording. So my audience may not know you, so can you tell us a little bit about you?
Yep. I am a mom of two little boys. They're 5 and 8. I'm a content creator. I own my own small business where I also do social media consulting and management and content creation for clients as well. And I am on Instagram and TikTok as it's me _ Abby E. And I talk a lot about marriage and motherhood, mostly the realities of motherhood, the hardships of motherhood. There's no sugarcoating it here. Where I live on my little corner of the internet. And I also talk a lot about domestic labor, sharing it equally, the inequities of it, how damaging that is to women and mothers and young girls, and trying to change that conversation and the approach of how that works in cishet marriages.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, like we were just talking like off camera, like it's so important to have like a balance of everyone's doing their part of it. So what would you say led you to become, because I remember when you were like a mommy influencer, if I can even like take you back to those days, like your outfits are always cute, like you always had like the best things. But like what made you make that jump?
I was actually in therapy, and I was having, like, my husband and I have always had a pretty like fair, equal divide of domestic labor. We haven't really had any issues per se, but we were having a moment, and I was, talking to my therapist, and I was like, I feel like I'm doing everything right now. And she was like, I want you to read this book called Fair Play by Eve
Mm,
Rodsky.
mhm.
And she was like, just see what it can do. And I read it, and I was like, oh my God, this is like a tangible way that you can more equally divide up the domestic labor in your home, more fairly. And I was just like, my mind was blown. And anytime I would talk about how my husband and I kind of divided tasks in our house on TikTok and Instagram, everybody was like their minds were blown. Like, your husband cooks dinner, he meal preps, he puts the kids to bed, he goes grocery shopping, he does school supplies. Like, they were like, what is this
He can
unicorn?
parent without you. Yeah.
And I was like, that's not, I don't understand how this isn't an expectation. And so I just kind of was really passionate about fair play, talked about it a lot, talk about the mental load of motherhood and marriage, because it falls squarely on women's shoulders. And it's just kind of grown from there.
Yeah. I would say I completely agree. Like completely agree. And that's something that I've liked about your relationship because I've followed you for so long. Like I've seen that you guys do things as fair can be, right? Like, is it 100% fair all of the time? Absolutely not. And you like seeing your guys' relationship was the first time that I had, because same thing, like I have girlfriends that are like, oh, my husband doesn't do this. He doesn't do that. He doesn't do that. And I'm like, mine does. And so then I got to thinking, well, maybe it's because my husband's been married before. And so he had to, like, after they got divorced, he had to cook, he had to clean, he had to do laundry, he had to run the house and do all of the things. But then, like, in our relationship, it just kind of happened like that. But then again, it's that expectation, though, right? And
Mhm.
it's, but then it goes both ways, right? Like, it's very easy for me to take on everything because he's gone as half the week. So I naturally do everything. And it's easier for me to do everything because I've already got a system and a routine in place. Just because it's easier doesn't necessarily mean that I need to do it 100% of the time when he's gone. Yes, but like not when he's here. So seeing that your relationship was like that, I thought, oh, finally there's somebody else that like has a relationship set up, model, whatever, that's like mine. But your guys' relationship has always been like that. Or
Yes
more
and
like
no.
conversation?
I think after our son was born, my husband was working like the night shift, and I would get up at like 7 and drop our son off, get his bag ready, drop our son off at my mom's. And then my husband would come home and sleep and basically got to go pick up our son whenever he felt like it. And then I was still coming home and doing the cooking, doing the dinner, doing the bedtime and bath time. And I was like, no, this is not going to work for me. I know we have like opposite schedules, but I'm going to need more for you. I was really resentful of like his free time when I
Hmm.
didn't have any. And we just sat down, and my husband has always been super receptive of like, okay, yeah, I hear you. Like, I totally, like, I get that. What can we do to, how can we change this? How can this be more equal and you get more time? And the biggest thing for us was him, taking a different position, which um, was his choice. He wanted to do that anyways, but it was largely beneficial for our family as a whole. Um, and honestly, we've just kind of evolved from there, thrown another kid and things change. Kids get older, they start school, they change. Um, and it was just, it's always been changing. So we've always just kind of had check-ins and, how are things going? The boys are starting school, who's going to do lunch, who's going to do drop off and pick up. And so I think it's been really important for us to check in and make sure things are still headed in the right direction. We're still, you know, there's nobody who's got resentment building under the surface, and everybody's, happy and healthy.
That's yeah, I like that. And like we're talking off camera, like that simmering of like resentment, because then it's just gonna come out and it's not gonna come out like in the best way. I mean, at least for me anyway, like once I blow my top, it's like everywhere and it's not pretty. And then now you're on damage control, right? So
Mhm.
since you talk a lot about this, I mean, since I follow you, I see some of the trolls that you get, to put it nicely. Um, but I feel like most of your audience is like, yes, oh my gosh, thank you so much for putting this into words. And when you started, did you think that you were kind of like the only person that thought this, or felt like you were the only person that struggled with it and like wanted it to be more, or like,
It did seem like naturally, and like most things, you think like this is only happening to me. Like
right,
even
yeah.
though like we know like this isn't, but like in the moment you're like, this is only my thing, like this is only a me issue. And it wasn't necessarily that I thought that I was the only one. It was that like I had different expectations.
Hmm.
Um, I approached things differently. I was speaking out about how coddled men were and are as children, and they're not taught those basic life skills of domestic labor. They're not really taught to think about anybody but themselves because societal expectations for men and women and boys and girls are completely different, and we're brought up completely, different ways. And so I was expressing my standards for my husband and who my potential partner was going to be when I was younger. And a lot of people were like, I didn't even, I've always been told that that was too high of a standard, that my expectations were too high, my standards were too high. And I was like, I very quickly learned that this is a very large issue that the majority of women um, are facing. They're not only working full time, but they're also taking on 95% of the domestic labor. So they're working about, almost three full-time jobs,
Yeah.
trying to trying to do it all. So I just learned a lot very quickly that this was not an isolated incident, and the narrative and the approach to domestic labor needed and still needs to change.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, yeah, you're right. Like we're brought up and like boys do this, girls do that, and never shall the two meet, right? And then when you get into a situation where you're trying to raise a family and I don't know, like for me, it was just like one day I was like, what the hell? Like, I, like I'm doing everything. Like, why is this happening? Right? Like, everyone else is competent and able to do whatever they need to do. Like with my stepkids, I was like, they're old enough to do certain things that they weren't doing. Like, I could see because I was super resentful, like as a stepmom. So the time I was like, all hands off deck. Like I'm out. Like this sucks. But I could
Yeah.
see that my husband was struggling. And granted, part of it was my fault because I was like super resentful about the situation that I found myself in. And then we were just talking about it this morning. And he's like, it's kind of like our roles have flipped. Like he was doing everything, like when my stepkids were in the house, like in early years. And then I was a part-time stepmom, full-time stepmom, and then like my daughter and my stepson are here. And then now, like to a degree, I feel like I do everything. Granted, he helps out like immensely, but again, he's gone half the time. So I feel like I do most of the stuff. I'm a
Mhm.
stay-at-home mom. So yeah, that happens. But then like when you get to that point where you're like, wait, and this sounds so ridiculous to say, like, wait, I can just say, hey, here are all of the things that need to be done. I'm going to do these things. Or what things would you like to be do? And like, what things would you like to do? And then like, we're done with it. Like, then like, now this is you, these are your tasks and these are my tasks. And it's not like I need to task you, right? Because I'm not your mom.
Mhm.
And like, that's a whole nother like topic that we can get into.
Not
But
your
like,
project manager.
right. Yeah. I mean, I am so good at running my life. Like, let me run yours. But like, there's just one more thing in my mental load of like, I don't want that. And you are a full functioning, capable adult on your own. Or at least I hope so because I did marry you. But like, and if not, then like that's what, and again, another conversation. But like, I don't need to micromanage you. I don't
Yeah.
like it. It doesn't feel good. Like, no.
Mhm.
So you have two boys. Talk to me about how you're raising them differently because you said that your like views are different.
Yes. So I think I had to like battle with my own internalized misogyny when my kids were younger too. Like when my oldest was 5, he wanted a play kitchen. And I was like, oh, that seems, like really girly. And then I was like, shut up, dummy. Like he sees his dad cook every other night. He sees his dad clean all the time. Like, why is this so ingrained that this is a feminism
Hmm.
or a feminine, task? And, and then you also have family that plays in and they're like,
Of course. Yeah.
kitchen, like you're letting him paint his nails. And I'm just like, the gender, the gender identification, like, it doesn't matter. Like if I'm going to raise my kids how they want. And I think a lot of my approach changed when I started doing more like conscious and respectful parenting.
Hmm.
Just really made me view raising children in a whole different way.
Hmm.
And was like, they are their own people. Like we go over, like my boys love to paint their nails. Um, and I still grapple with this, not because I don't like it. It's I'm afraid of what other people are going to think for
Hmm.
them.
Hmm.
But then I get mad at myself because I'm like, if I'm teaching them to care about what other people think, then am I really teaching them to be, who they truly are? So we always talk like we had the boys, they were painting their nails, and my oldest was going to a birthday party the next day. And I was like, what are you going to say if somebody tells you that fingernail
Yeah.
polish is for girls? And he was like, I'm gonna be like, that's stupid. This is just a color. Like, I just like doing it because this is my favorite color. And I was like, good. So we practice like what happens when those moments come up. But I think just teaching my kids, like, to me, they're just basic life skills. This isn't male and female or feminine and masculine tasks. These are simply tasks that any person at an adult age should know how to do, whether that's cooking and cleaning and laundering and scheduling oil changes, scheduling appointments, knowing your healthcare, plans and your taxes and all of those things. And not, it's simply doing it so that they can be self-sufficient adults, whether they choose later in life to be in relationships of any kind or if they want to stay single. It's solely to benefit them and not anybody else. Like, yes, I want them to grow up and be, good, empathetic and emotionally mature partners, but also I just want them to be that as adults because it doesn't just play out in relationships, it plays out in, platonic relationships and in work environments and team environments, and not just expecting someone else to take on the majority or all of the mental and invisible labor of, whether that's a home or a job or a team, whatever that might be. So we're definitely working to raise um, more self-confident boys, leaving toxic masculinity in the dust.
How is it going? Do you feel like
Really? It's good.
Good, yeah.
My youngest, I think it's so odd. It's, you have two kids, they come from the same two people, and yet they are worlds
Apart.
apart and so different. And my youngest, still says like pink is for girls. Like, I don't want to wear pink. And I'm like, nobody's forcing you to wear pink. Like, I'm not going to make you wear pink. But pink isn't for girls. It's a color. It doesn't have a gender.
Yeah.
Um, but hey, if you don't want to wear pink, you don't wear pink. And my oldest is more like, he cares much less, and he's like, if I like it, I like it, and he is comfortable like speaking up and like speaking up for himself. um so it's, and we're trying to teach my oldest like more responsibility and teaching him how to cook and clean and do his laundry, and finding those like age appropriate chores isn't always the easiest, and honestly it's more about being consistent on our end because that's hard. Like, I want you to cook dinner, but also I don't need this to take 3 hours every night because
Oh my
I'm
gosh.
exhausted and we need to
Yeah.
get this done. So,
Yeah.
but I think just modeling those, talking to them about those types of things, seeing the dynamic that my husband and I have and the example that we set for them, I think is hugely important.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I totally relate, especially about like the cooking part when you're like, I don't want it to take 3 hours. Like I want to include you and I want you to learn this lesson, but at what cost?
Yes. Yeah.
I want to ask you about this reel that you made. I don't even know, it's probably like a month ago now, about scheduling appointments. And I know, like, yeah, obviously you know which one I'm talking about, but like, because it's the invisible load is what you had talked about with that. Like, you're scheduling an appointment, but then if they don't have availability and like going back and like following up, can I get in? Can I get in? Can I get in? And like, does it fit with my schedule? Does it fit with my husband's schedule? Does it fit with my kids' schedule? Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah. So I have the more flexible schedule as the one who works from home and kind of sets my own hours and does my own thing. So we just have like we revisit that, from time to time on, hey, how are we doing with this? Because there'll be times where like there's a week where, I have to be at a client's office or something, and I have to communicate that with my husband and say, we have an appointment this day, but at the same time, I am majority the one doing that, especially during school time,
Mhm.
just because I have more of that free time. But it's not just taking your kid to this appointment. It's first of all finding a doctor, like finding a doctor with availability, then finding and laddering it up to your own availability, picking your kid up from school. At the time my son was, he had, I don't know, an illness or something, but he needed to have Motrin. He was not going to feel good. He needed a snack because it was going to be over lunchtime. I needed to, it's just all the things. I need to make sure I have wet wipes in the car because he hates being sticky, and I don't want this to turn into a meltdown. And then I
Yeah.
have to time, what I'm going to do while I'm there, and then when we're done, and then the follow up and the communication with the doctor for the results. And it's a lot of the things it that you don't see and you can't see. It all happens behind the scenes. It all happens up here a lot of the time because we're not just like writing out everything, necessarily that we have to do. It's just we're carrying that around. And a lot of men were like, you're overthinking this, like you're overdoing it. He doesn't need Motrin, he doesn't need a snack. Like, and I'm like, that kind of stuff makes my life easier, because if I don't have a snack, then I have to deal with the hangriness. If he doesn't have the Motrin, then he's going to be in pain, and it's going to come out as anger and frustration and meltdown for my own mental sanity. I can't have that shit.
Yeah.
I can't have that. I need to be like, make this as easiest as I can on myself when I'm doing this. Um, but a lot of, yeah, that's the stuff that goes unseen and unappreciated, because unless you're the one in charge of that, you don't know what it's like.
Yeah. And I've like had something like that too. And I've said, okay, then you do it. You do it and you do it your way. And when that happens, it's a fucking disaster. And like, especially if you can hear it, right? That's the worst. Like, if you can hear it unfolding and you're like, that wouldn't have happened if I did it because, and it's not a tit for tat thing. It's not, I'm better than you. It's the mental gymnastics of staying ahead of that meltdown, right? Because that's not what you want. And like appointments in the middle of the day or any sort of disruption, it doesn't even have to be the middle of the day, any sort of disruption to the routine or the plan or whatever is at play, like needs to be communicated. Because I'll tell you what, I would be pissed if I'm in the middle, like sitting right here in the middle of talking to you, and my husband came in and was like, hey, we gotta go. Well, what do you mean? I'm in the middle of something right now, right? Like, so I, like when I talk to people about, like you talked about gentle parenting, about that, it's a partnership with your kids. And like same thing for me, like if I'm in the middle of, if I've done something and I know that like, okay, I just need to get through this for the next 30 minutes or whatever, and then I'm going to eat lunch, and somebody's going to come in and like yank that away from me. Well, I was already getting hungry, but now I'm hangry, right? So that mental shift of like, my kid is not an extension of me. They're not a mini me. They're like their own entity, right? Like that really, that's one thing that like grates my nerves. And I like, as women, I feel like we are more, I would say our, not species, but like our sex is more of like, oh, that's a mini me. And I'm like, not really, especially if you've got a daughter, right? Like, so I've got a daughter. So like, oh, it's a mini me. Like, we're matching clothes and let's do all that. We do matching outfits sometimes if she wants to do them, and like we have matching swimsuits or we've got matching dresses, and if she pulls them out and says, hey, you want to wear these, I'm all in. But like I've never been the one to like matching shirt with the matching pants with the bow, like kind of like you with your boys, like wear whatever you want, girlfriend. Like yesterday she wore a Halloween shirt. Sometimes she'll wear like Halloween pants and like a Christmas shirt and striped socks or what. Wear whatever you want. But
Mhm.
it's the mental gymnastics of staying ahead of what's going on. Like this morning, like going to school was a disaster. She was an hour and 15 minutes late. And yeah, I mean, you get it, right? And so we pull up and I have a message like, hey, is she coming today? And I'm like, yeah, we're outside. Be there in 2 seconds. But it was, it's 60 degrees here, 61 degrees here. So 16 degrees Celsius, if that's what, like that's how you compute. But she wanted to wear a romper. But we're not wearing a romper. Like, and normally I'm all like, wear whatever you want, but it's too cold for you to wear that with sandals. It's going to be fall. You're going to be cold. Like, we can't do that, specific like closed-toed school shoes thing from school. And so it turned into like a freaking disaster, a disaster. And I was just like, it's not a battle that I want. So finally, I just like came up to her bedroom and was like, hey, like, talk to me. Like, what's happening? Right? Like when you like can take a step back. I mean,
Mhm.
luckily, I didn't, like the only thing I had planned this morning was like talking to you, but like, so I had all the time in the world. But if I didn't, like if I had to be somewhere, right, like you, like then like that's eating my head too, right? And so I'm like, talk to me about what's going on. And she's like, I feel scared about putting my clothes on. And I'm like, okay, like, what are you scared about? Every day we put our clothes on. Every day we go to bed. Every day we brush our teeth, right? Like the bedtime thing. But I'm like, no, it's what you need right now is some empathy. I don't feel good. I don't feel good. I have a pounding headache and I'm trying to like show up in my best way. So again, there's like that mental gymnastics of like, like try to woo some my way through this and like get through it, like without losing it
Yeah.
and having
Yes.
like a screaming fit because okay, because I know that you're really good at this. If somebody is listening and they're like, okay, I obviously see that my household dynamic isn't equal, and maybe their household dynamic isn't going to be completely 50-50 and it's not going to be completely equal. What are steps that you would say they could take to help lessen their mental load or help have more of like a fair share?
Um, so I think so I over the summer I was lucky enough I got to go through the Fair Play facilitator training and became certified as a facilitator. Um, and I think the main core of it is that like we say equal, but and when we say equal, we think 50-50, but the goal is really just fair. Like what is fair in this moment? What is fair this week? But I think one of the things that people really get hung up on when we talk about like more better ways to equalize things is that they're thinking like the daily grind things. Like I got to get the kids up, I got to get them ready for school, make lunches, cook dinner, do dishes, do laundry, like all those things that like happen on an every single day basis, sometimes a multiple times a day basis. And if you have a spouse that works crazy hours or they're gone for long periods of time, they can't really participate in those daily grind tasks. But there are tasks that are more not consistent. They're things that don't have to be dealt with every day, not even every week, but that help take off that mental load. So things like, you know, the health insurance or scheduling out things like, they can do appointments. Like you can do appointments when you're not at home. Like that's not something that you have to be home for. So I think the most helpful thing has been getting the actual deck of cards from Fair Play. It's 100 tasks. I don't think there's a task that isn't in there. Like if you could think of every task, like they're all there for you. And I think just looking at them, and because that's a very tangible way, like I can see this task, like it's here, it's in my hand. I know it. I'm not just back of my mind holding on to it. And you can say, like, I understand that you're gone, but here are the things that you can do without having to be home, without having to be here day in and day out. And you can own this. And a lot of that, I think, for women specifically, is giving that up because
Yeah.
we've been forced to take it. Like we've been forced to own these tasks. And I hear a lot of women like they give that task up and then it's done poorly on purpose or it's done to lower standards that they have. And then men are like, well, I don't even know why I offer to help because you just complain every time I do it.
Wait, can we
And
pause for a second? Can you
yeah,
talk about the weaponized incompetence?
yeah, just it's doing something poorly on purpose so you're not asked to do it again, which has been joked about and normalized between men and even between women, that this is just something that happens. It's haha funny, like, oh, my husband doesn't know how to fold the clothes correctly, or he put a red shirt in with the whites and now everything's pink, and now I'm not going to ask him to do that again. Like the way it's really unfortunate the way society treats men,
Yeah.
because they treat them like idiots, and that's so unfair to them because
Mm.
they're incredibly smart, they're incredibly competent, and to continue to treat them as anything but that is detrimental not only for them but for us, for children, for boys, and so the more that we joke about that kind of thing, like you see it in sitcoms, like you see it
Yeah.
in Everybody Loves Ray, you see it in Friends, you see it in King of Queens. It's funny that you know Ray doesn't know his kids' birthdays when he goes to the doctor. Like, ha 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 ha, such a husband thing. Like he's so hands off and unaware of what's happening in his family that he doesn't know, his kids' birthdays or their allergies. And we've all just been, it's a relatable thing now because so many women experience it. So we're like, oh my God, yeah, that's my husband. But we have to stop normalizing that and be like, hey, this isn't funny. This is actually really harmful. And it doesn't do anybody any good. It just sets women up to continue to expect that kind of behavior and allow it. And that doesn't help anybody out in the long run. It doesn't help men out. It doesn't help women out. So but it happens a lot. Or you see the ones, you're getting ready to host a party and your husband is out washing the driveway or cleaning the gutters, and you're like, nobody is going to see that. No, we're not partying on the roof, sir.
We're
We're
not? Oh, okay.
in this house. We need the floors vacuumed and mopped and the bathrooms cleaned. But there is something to say. We're like, it's not a lack of communication. It's a lack of understanding. Like women have taken this stuff on. We've been the owners of these things. If we truly want to make this more fair, we have to come together and divide the tasks up fairly for us and then set a minimum standard of care for those tasks. It's a really tedious process. This is not a come in tonight, let's fix this, because when you do those quick fixes, they don't last.
Yeah.
A lot from women. Well, he said he would do this and he did it for like a week. And then it stopped and we're back to the same rigmarole. Here we are again, going through this. I'm asking for help. You do it for a while, and then we're back to the same old, same old. So you have to put in the work up front. Like the fair play method is tedious and time consuming, but you have to do that if you want the end goal to be you actually being able to give that up, give that control up, and have trust in your partner that they're going to get it done, and an agreed upon standard. So everybody has to sit down. If you're like, hey, if you're holding the dishes card, here's what it means to do that. Like, here's what it means to complete this task. And you both have to sit, everybody's going to have to give and take, especially the owner of the card, which is most likely the woman. You're going to have to find a common ground here. It can't just be, this is how I've done it, so this is how it has to be. And I think one of the most interesting things I took from my training was like to approach it and hear both of your reasons as to why you think it should be that. Because a lot of times it comes from how your family did it or how your mom did it or your dad did it, and all those like those things really play into how we think that they should be done. And it can just be a really good way to kind of relate to each other and be like, oh, okay, I could see how, you feel like just leaving them on the drying mat is fine, whereas like it bothers me seeing those out before I go to bed. So like, what can we do to make sure that we're on the same page about what it takes to complete this task?
Yeah. I love that you talked about like holding onto that card and like being able to give it away. Because it's the same thing with kids though too. If I like when you're teaching them to like do laundry or teaching them to do dishes or you're teaching them to do something, as soon as you ask them to do it, it's not going to be done to your standard, right? And so even like you and I, like woman to woman, like if you ask me to do something, I'm probably not going to do it to your standard because I don't know how you do it. I mean, I know what you're expecting me to do, but I don't know exactly what you want me to do. But then same thing, like if I'm tasking you with something, you're going to do it and I'm going to come back and tweak something inevitably, right? And so it's not like a, well, you just didn't do it right. So I guess I'm just going to take it back. There's a give and a take, and there's that compromise and that like, let's work together rather than just making it funny again. Like, oh, it doesn't know how to do it. But kind of the same thing. I would say like my husband and I are pretty equal, like as far as like our expectations are. Um, I was the one that really struggled with expectations as far as like when it came to the kids. So I came into a relationship without kids. And so I was like, well, from a very young age, like I meticulously vacuumed the carpet, right? And I've talked about this before, like perfect lines. Otherwise, I'd have to do it again, right? So imagine my frustration when no one in my house vacuums like that. Not even my 4-year-old daughter vacuums like that. And I'm like, what the hell? But I'm like, okay, it's one of those things that it's done. I'm not doing it. It might not be done to like my crazy high expectation, which if we're honest, a lot of the times our expectations are crazy high, even for ourselves in my situation. And but I'm willing to die on that hill, like trying to get it done to like that expectation, right? Like it's a blessing and a curse. But you just have to be okay with it's not done perfectly. And you can go back and say, hey, Abby, I know I asked you to wash the dishes. What I didn't want you to do was to leave all of the bowls face down on the mat because now they're like the condensations in there, that whatever. Here's what that looks like, right? Like, and yeah, having that conversation as opposed to like ridiculing them about whatever.
Yeah.
And
It's
then,
it's a hard thing, to trust your partner enough to pass that off, especially when you've been burned in the past. You've
yeah,
tried this before. You've been down this road before. It has not yielded the results that you wanted. So it's normal to be afraid that this isn't going to go the right way, and it might not in the beginning. And one of the things we have to ask ourselves was this done intentionally poorly? Am
yes.
I seeing a pattern, or was this like by accident? Like I didn't communicate, like, we had a mix up and there was a miscommunication, or I didn't get around to it at this time. It's just, is this done on purpose, willfully ignorant, or is this, a couple mess ups? Like nobody's perfect. You're going to mess up. Like if my husband was like, go mow the lawn, like, because that's his thing. I mean, typical, like that's his thing. But if he was like, anything else, like I would be like, okay, like it might take me a couple times, but I'm not. You have to decide, like, am I doing this purposely wrong, or am I just going through a learning curve of taking on something new, and figuring it out as well.
And I like that you touched on the flip side of it because specifically lawn, because we're getting our lawn done now. I don't know if you can hear them mowing in the background. Can you hear that? Okay, great. But I actually don't mind mowing. However, I do mind weed whacking. I'm out. I don't like it. I don't want to do it. Like it's just like meticulous. It's like tedious. I don't want to do it. Well, my husband did that like in college, like as a part of his job. And so he's really good at it. He's very meticulous about it and whatever. And so I'm like, it's not that big of a deal. You can do that. But yeah, if he were to task me with something that he typically does, I probably not going to get it right either. But like, there's that ego part of it that you have to take out if somebody comes back and critiques you, right? Because it doesn't have to be World War III. It doesn't have to be this like you're trying to attack me because of whatever. I'm just coming back to give you some feedback.
Mhm.
But then I also want you to like be receptive of that if I'm giving feedback to you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that like, because the hardest part, like when you're talking about implementing a new way of like equally dividing labor is like, how do I approach this conversation?
Yeah.
This is going to be something that's heated. This is clearly something that like I have, below the level of resentment about. I'm tired, I'm burnt out. I need to find a way that I can come to my partner with this in a way where I am rational. And one of the most interesting things I found was like saying to your partner, like, I want this conversation to be um, concise, um, happy, and um, you know, uh, like an open dialogue. Like these are the expectations I want from this. Like I'm not here to ridicule you. I'm not here to make you feel bad. I'm not here to say, look at all the shit that I do and look at all the shit that you don't do. Like
Yeah.
that's not going to be a productive conversation. And I think it takes a lot of work to get there, especially because you don't know why your partner could automatically get defensive. I think a lot of it is things that we're not aware of that aren't on the surface for us to see that they might be feeling. So I think that's probably one of the most asked questions I get is, well, how do I approach this subject with my spouse, with my husband specifically? Because anytime I do, it just turns into this massive fight, and he's saying, nothing I do is ever good enough for you. And that's a really hard thing to come to terms with.
Yeah. We had issues like in our step family, but this would work in this situation too, where it got to the point where we would have check-ins and it would be every other Friday. Like it started out weekly and then we got it to be like every other week. And then now we don't even do them. Um, Mostly because the kids are out of the house. But more importantly, like we got to the point where I got to the point, let's start there. I got to the point where I was like, okay, these aren't that big of a deal, right? Like I was tit for tat, 100% full stop. But I would like make a list of like 800 million things that had pissed me off that week. And then, okay, Friday morning at 11 o'clock, when I've got this meeting with him, I would go through it before I'd meet with him and be like, well, this doesn't matter anymore. This doesn't matter anymore. This doesn't matter anymore. Right. And we both knew though that that check-in was to see how things were going like in our family dynamic, like how are things going between the two of us, how are things going between like us and the kids, how are things going like with us in the other house, like what are things we could improve on. But we both knew that time specifically was for that. And you can't come in and like blindside somebody like, hey, let's talk right now about what our household dynamic is like, let's talk right now about all of the things that I'm doing and the things that you're not doing. Wait a minute, you don't even know if they're ready for that, right? Like they could have just gotten off like a super stressful phone call. They could have just had it out with a friend. Like work could not be going well. They just got in from like whatever happened, right? So setting it up, setting aside that time, but then also if you're in this meeting, because we would just call it a check-in. So if you're in this check-in and things are starting to go sideways, typically it was me. Like it was always me. Like I would just be like, hey, you know what? I can already feel that I'm starting to get pissed. I can already feel my blood is starting to boil. And I don't want to flip out because I want this to be a productive conversation.
Yeah.
I can't even believe I'm going to say this, but like, let's take a break and we'll rejoin in an hour or we'll
Yeah.
rejoin in 2 hours or whatever. Right. And so then everyone's got kind of a cool off time to, recombobulate and figure out, okay, what was she trying to say? Or what was he trying to convey?
Mhm.
And working together or like have an agenda. Like I know this sounds so business like, but if you come at it from that perspective, it really works,
does. It
right? Like,
does.
yeah, like here's the agenda for the meeting. Like, we're going to touch on these different things. And it sounds like, oh, you're really controlling. You're like, you're overthinking that. And it's like, actually, like, I kind of need it for myself to like stay on topic or stay in here, because what you don't want to do is walk away from this and then tomorrow be like, I forgot to mention that. And then like, I'm just going to hit you with it tomorrow when you're like not ready for it.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, like, have a check-in, and like, you don't have to correct me on this. You don't have to fix anything right now. I just need you to know this is how I'm feeling. I'm
Mhm.
feeling overwhelmed that to me, it feels like I'm taking on more of everything because you're gone or you're traveling or whatever. So when you're home, if you could do X, Y, and Z, like,
Mhm.
keep that open dialogue. But it takes practice. It takes practice to not like flip out. It takes
Mhm.
practice to use the right words. And I say this like
Mhm.
in coaching sessions with stepmoms, like, practice what you're going to say, but also like practice in front of a mirror, because your face, Abby, is like mine. Like, it's all over your face, like whatever you're thinking, right? Like, there's no hiding it. So I'm like, practice what you're going to say, but
Mhm.
practice it in front of a mirror so your facial expressions actually match what's coming out of your mouth.
Yeah.
Does
Yeah.
your
I
husband
think,
ever?
oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
The other thing like that I thought that I found was really helpful in the training was like after you say like, hey, I'm feeling very much like, I'm taking on a lot of the work here, trying to find a doctor, trying to find a therapist, trying to like make these changes for our son. And I don't feel like you're being, that you're participating in that. I feel like I'm taking that all on myself. And then say, okay, that's what I said, but what did you hear?
Oh yeah.
What, how did you receive that? Because a lot of times that's not what they're hearing is not actually what we're saying. What they're receiving is hearing, you suck, you're not doing anything.
Yep.
Um, you're making me feel like shit. And you're like, whoa, 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 whoa. That's not actually what I said. Like, so you really have to like take that and set it aside because I am very much like, I take it personally. And I'm like, my first feeling is get defensive.
Yep.
And then I have to actively like, shh, just
Yeah.
just listen, let the man speak his piece. Like Mike is always cool, calm, and collected, and I'm always like, just
Me too.
right up to the top.
We're the same and our husbands are the same. Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay. So I have to like, because he'll be like, that's not what I said. How you feel is different than what I said. So let's talk about that. Because I think that happens a lot. People get defensive, especially when you come to them and you're saying like, I feel like I'm doing XYZ, or I feel like, we're not spending enough time together. That person might automatically think like, oh, because they're thinking like, oh, well, I did this and this and this throughout the week. And then you're sitting here telling me I didn't. You're automatically going to be like, oh, well, now I don't feel heard and appreciated.
Yeah. And to kind of go back to, fair doesn't always mean, or equal doesn't always, wait, no, fair doesn't always mean equal, right? So this morning, after I dropped my daughter off at school, like, I got back and my husband and I were talking about like how drop off went, because here was chaos and there it wasn't like as much chaos, but I was like, oh, and so we were just debriefing like what happened. And I'm like, even though I'm the one that took her to school today, like, it was his turn. It was better for me to do it, but I was like, that's just one more thing. And he was like, I hear you and I understand what you're saying, but it's also not that I didn't do anything.
Yep.
I cleaned up breakfast. I did the dishes. I put them away. And so me, like, because I'm always like sarcastic, I'm like, I would love to just be able to do the dishes and put them away. And that's it. And he was like, I know. But so sometimes the heavy hitting part is really mentally draining, but there's still all of these other things that need to happen, right? And so when I'm doing the heavy part of it and I'm completely drained, my husband is awesome at making sure all of like the minute things get handled, where I'm like, the dishes will sit there for 6 hours because I need to check out from this situation. But then I've also got my day is scheduled. So I'm not going to get all of these other things done, where he's really good at like those kinds of things. And so it's a really nice balance, but it's also, he's not doing nothing. He's
Mhm.
actually doing something. And I feel like sometimes we discredit that as women because you're not doing something as big as I am. It's not as important, which
Hmm.
isn't necessarily true because I used to get caught up in the tit for tat thing. Like, I'm doing this massive thing. You should be doing this massive thing too, right?
Yep.
And even like on our trip, granted, I did most of the parenting, but my husband was the one that was driving. He was the one that was navigating. Like, I would plug in whatever, but like he would, like, we travel really well together. We work really well as a team together. We've got our own like parts that we play and like do really well. And so sometimes even I get in my own head and I'm like, this sucks. Like, I'm doing everything by myself. But then I have to sit there in the 30 seconds that I've got by myself before somebody else talks to me and be like, okay, what has he done? And then I have like a litany of things that he's done. And I'm like, okay, he's not doing anything. Right now, you're just being an ungrateful jerk. Like, you just need to, like, he's doing something. Like, your pity party of one needs to come to an end. Like, you're doing okay. Like, it's okay. But like, I need that reality check sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the difference is that is like setting the expectation and setting the ground rules, but then it's how often are we having to revisit this? Because if I'm having to like we're having to revisit this like once a week, every week of like, hey, I'm still feeling like really burnt out, like I'm taking the brunt of it, then that's something that needs to have, a larger conversation. But we also have to be, conscious of we all have different brains.
Yeah.
Like my husband's brain works so much differently than my brain. And there's nothing wrong with looking at your house or your family and the tasks and playing those to your strengths. Like there's nothing wrong with that. Like my husband is way better at like cleaning the house within like record time than me because I'm like, what do I do? There's so much
Yeah.
I don't know where to start. This is
Yep.
overwhelming. And then
Yep.
I'm very much like, oh, I'm gonna go put this away. And then I'm like, oh God, this closet's a mess. Let me start doing this. And you're just like,
Yeah.
I can't, I'm terrible at that. Well, he'll just go when he's like done, 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 done. And I'm like,
Mine too.
I wish I could do that. I
Like,
can't
who are you? Yeah.
give me your brain. Um, but yeah, and keeping that in mind and talking about like, here's how I think through the process of doing things. How do you think through it? And I think it's just really better understanding your spouse on a level that you're probably just not thinking yet.
Yeah. I'm with you. Like, I wish that I like, okay, so we got back from our trip and the next day I was just burnt out. But like, we had decided, okay, we're just gonna clean the house from top to bottom. And he's like hammering things out, room after room after room. And I'm like staring at this load of laundry that's like on the bed that I need to fold, like paralyzed. Because I'm like, I need to put this away. I've tasked my daughter with like picking up her toys because I'm also like gonna vacuum. But I was just like in paralysis mode. Like, I couldn't, it took me like literally all day just to do like 3 loads of laundry, I think. But also, same thing as you, I like start doing this and then, I'm like distracted because she's like, hey, can you help me do this? Can I? And I'm like, yes. So I go and do that. And then I'm like, okay, where was I? Oh, yeah, I was back over here at the laundry. And then it's like, oh, wait, I need to switch the one in the like from the wash to the dryer. But I'm like watching him in astonishment of like, wow, you just cleaned all of the bathrooms in like an hour.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing, right?
Yeah,
And
jealous.
and no one talked to you. Which is like another part of it. Another part of like being the default parent. Oh my gosh. Okay, I could talk to you all day about all of these things, but I do want to be mindful of your time. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram and TikTok. It's me underscore Abby E. It's the same on both channels.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this week's episode. If anything was helpful or resonated with you, please share it on social media and tag me. I'm just at Alicia Crosco. And if you could leave a 5-star rating and a review while you're at it, that would also be really helpful. And if you find yourself struggling with your stepmom journey and you want a little bit more support without the hefty price tag of coaching, you might want to check out the Stepmom Side community,
which is my own private community for stepmoms, where you get to connect with other stepmoms around the world, and myself, where I hold weekly office hours and monthly group coaching. It's kind of like you have your own personal coach in your own back pocket. Again, without that hefty price tag. See you next week.